Okay, I'm trying out a different style of video here, where I have a bunch of recorded clips that I've already done, and I'm going to try and narrate them after the fact with points that I think are important. So, I've got two machines here today. This one is the least interesting of the two, so we'll go ahead and have a look at it first. What you can see here is that we have a socket 5 CPU socket. That would put this as being one of the earlier Pentium systems. To be more specific, it's actually the second Pentium socket. The first one was a socket 4, and the socket 4 was for the very early Pentiums that ran off of 5 volts. There were not very many of those, and they didn't really sell all that well. The socket 5 was the first 3.3 volt socket. The socket 5 was also the first to use the staggered pin grid array, which allowed the chip's pins to be spaced more closely together, and thus you could have more pins. Here we can see a couple of things. We can see part of the Intel chipset. I believe this system would have been an Intel 430 chipset, but I'm not positive on that. We can also see a Dallas DS12887A. This is the CMOS battery. In a way, it was better than the old NiCad batteries because it didn't leak. But it wasn't rechargeable, and when it died, that was pretty much the end of that. Some machines were socketed, this one is not, so in order to replace this, you'd have to take it off the board by desoldering it, which is kind of annoying. This is a COAST module. Now, COAST stands for Cache on a Stick, and it was used to add level 2 cache to a Pentium CPU. Was used by Intel on their systems with 430 chipsets, which I guess tells us what chipset this machine happens to have, now doesn't it? Probably a few other chipsets as well, though. It appeared as late as 1998 with the Pentium MMX before they integrated it in with the CPU. Slot 1 CPUs use a similar architecture, but they place the cache chips on the actual CPU cartridge. I've seen this slot very often, however, I've very rarely seen it populated. I think this is only the second time I've seen one of these populated. If we have a look here, we'll note that this is a very standard setup with a baby AT power supply. The motherboard itself, I believe, has 4 PCI and 3 ISA slots, one of which is a combination slot to give you a total of 7 usable expansion cards. None of the peripherals are integrated to the motherboard. The serial and parallel ports plug into the motherboard, but they're not actually on the motherboard itself. The keyboard is the old 5-pin DIN style AT bus, and the video is provided by an add-in. I believe in this case it's a PCI card, but I'd have to double check that. Maybe we'll even look at it later on in the video. It's also got an ISA networking card, which I believe has a Novell NetWare boot ROM on it. But again, I'm not 100% positive on that. I'd have to go ahead and have a look. We didn't really have a good look at this one, and I'm recording this after the fact. There's another once common sight, the Western Digital Caviar hard drive. These were ubiquitous, and they were usually pretty reliable. You can't actually read it, but the front panel sticker there says 386, so that would mean that this is actually an upgraded motherboard that was installed after the fact. Oops. Ooh, that's bad. Okay, well, give that a shot. That's a little big, though, I think. That doesn't sound very good either.
Well, it did figure out what it is.
Oh yeah, and this predates the days of BIOS auto detection for hard drive sizes. So if you've ever wondered what those numbers on the top of the drive actually mean for cylinders, heads, and sectors, this is where they had to go. It's here that I'll note the amount of installed memory, 32 megabytes. The system uses 72-pin SIMs.
Actually, that's probably for the other one. That's for the other one.
Now check that out. How is that for Y2K compliance? I believe that also tells us that the CMOS battery is dead in this particular unit. So I just went ahead and tried booting the system as is, and it's working. Which is kind of a big surprise, especially if you listen to all my commentary that's coming up.
Well, that's a surprise. That thing sounds terrible. I wonder if it'll actually make it. Oh my god. Ooh. That sounds awful. Oh, it's gonna work though. Wow. I think that's probably about as far as it's going to get. Oh, no.
Note the very high-tech security that Windows 95 employs. If you're wondering, I pushed the escape key.
How is that working? Oh my god. Okay, I realized actually that we don't have a PS2 port on the back of this. So, that could be interesting. There's a network card though.
If you can't actually hear what I'm saying here, I just noticed the network card now.
BGA, I wonder what kind of card that is. It's PCI. I'll have to check that out.
So I just installed a floppy drive. I've also installed case blanks, which we'll see in a second. You'll also see the error that I made when installing the floppy drive. I wonder if you could point that out before I point it out.
Oh, I didn't plug it in. That's actually plugged in. I guess it is.
If you ever come across this situation yourself where the floppy drive light is on solid, it's because you've hooked up the cable backwards.
I got something backwards.
Unfortunately, the floppy drive that I picked turned out to in fact be bad.
Oh, crap. There it goes. Oh, crap, I didn't check the... I wanted to see what kind of CPU it was. Damn it.
If you have a listen here, this hard drive has run into some bad sectors that I did not run into on the first boot. Apparently installing all the drivers must have put something in a bad place, or it's trying to read a driver that's on a bad place on this hard drive. We'll see why that matters coming up.
It's still working though. I can't believe it. Junk. Forget it. Wow. Would it be okay? I don't care. Pentium 100. Here we go. What a floppy disk. We have another one. What if this was the joke? Cool. Huh. That one works.
Alright, so after getting that floppy drive working, I set the other one aside and brought this one out. This is the cool one. This is original hardware. It is a 286, and, well, let's have a look at this one.
Here's the fun one. Check it out.
See all those chips back there? That's the RAM. That's how RAM used to be. Individual, I believe they called them DIP, for dual inline package memory modules. If one of those went bad, it was real fun to replace. As we'll see later on, this system actually has 1 megabyte of installed memory, which is quite a fair bit for a 286. The chipset on this board was made by VLSI, and there are actually 4 parts to the chipset. You'll see 4 of these integrated circuits scattered throughout the motherboard. Won't see that anymore. Most of them have been confined to 1 chip now for just the south bridge, because all the north bridge functions have been put into the CPU. Trying to get a look at the CPU right now. It's in a PLCC form factor. It's actually an AMD 286, clocked at 12 megahertz. The important thing to note about the BIOS on this machine is that it is split across multiple chips. Again, you won't really see that. I mean, nowadays you have 2 of them, but that's because you actually have 2 BIOS chips, one storing the actual BIOS and one storing a backup, just in case something goes wrong in the flashing process or so. But these are fairly small ROM chips, so back then the BIOS had to be on multiple chips because that was the only way that it would actually fit. What we're looking at right now is the the disk controller. Not only controls your floppy drive, but also the hard drives, and this is an old enough system that it still uses the ST506 interface, I believe with the MFM encoding. It calls it a Winchester drive. What you're looking at right now is actually the control connection. Unfortunately, somebody has stolen my control cable, so I can't actually use the hard drive in this machine, but you can have up to 2 drives, and there was 1 control cable which went to your primary drive.
Come on, focus, you piece of garbage. What the hell? Focus. What piece of shit? What's that?
An 8-bit VGA card. When's the last time you saw one of those? This is actually a Cirrus logic card. You'll note very carefully that it's an 8-bit card plugged into a 16-bit slot. This will matter later on.
Yeah, it's a video board. Cirrus logic. Yeah, it's a serial board. Is that serial? That can't be serial. No, it is serial. No, it's parallel. Parallel keyboard.
You couldn't hear what I was saying. That board has both a parallel port and the joystick port. Note the fact that we have 2 25-pin serial ports, but no 9-pin. Those weren't very common back when this system was made. The interesting thing to note here is not a function of the motherboard, because this is just a standard 5-pin DIN AT bus keyboard port, but rather it's a function of the case. You've got an opening in the back, but there's actually a redirect which sends the keyboard connection to the front. And this is more of a convenience feature than anything else. This is a power supply again. It's a fairly standard baby AT style. I didn't actually check the ratings, but I would be very surprised if it put out any more than 200 watts worth of power. And now we figured out what our hard drive is. It's a Seagate ST251 40 megabyte MFM hard drive. This is your defect map. This is all of the bad sectors on the drive. What you were supposed to do is, as the drive aged, you were supposed to write bad sectors as they were found on the top of this defect map. In practice, I don't think anybody ever did that. The ones that you see are the as from the factory defects.
Let's see here. How does this plug in?
Always make sure that the power switch on one of these old AT-style systems is turned off before plugging it in. Otherwise, you will give yourself quite the surprise. Been there, done that, several times.
All kinds of unhappy about the fact it's got a floppy drive on top of it. What can I do?
Here we'll note two error codes. The first one, the 2 beeps, indicates a fault in the first 64 kilobytes of memory, I believe, but it's not the important one. The important one is the 8 beeps that we get afterwards, which indicates a video problem. As you might guess, the problem is because we have an 8-bit video card plugged into a 16-bit slot, and that does not work. You can see here I've now moved the card 1 slot over to an 8-bit slot.
Aha!
If you hear that ticking, that was actually something a lot of older computers did. As it tested the memory, you'd get clicking through the PC speaker. Each increment of tested memory was 1 tick.
That's fine. Just
One thing you'll note here that I did not is that it says that the primary display is not installed. Should have really changed that, but I didn't. Or maybe I did. I actually am not sure. I'm doing this serially. Maybe we'll find that I changed it later on. You also note that the keyboard is not installed. That's another really weird thing. But this is before the days of auto detect.
let's say 1 gig RAM. 1 mega RAM, sorry. And that's installed. I don't really see. What's it talking about? This doesn't have an onboard controller. I have to find an IP for it if I want to do much with that. That works though. It does work, but there's not really much I can do with it.
As you can see here, even though in the system setup utility it said that we had no video, it is detecting the display type here, which is where our CMOS display type mismatch error comes from. You'll also note that we have 2 5¼ floppy drives, which is not true because we have 0. I didn't set those. Oops.
Just detecting the monitor. Oh well.
Alright, back to the Pentium system now, since there really wasn't much else I could do with the 286 without the required components. You can see I've since installed the floppy drive. Unfortunately, it does not match the faceplate. But oh well, you can't win everything. You can see I've also put the side cover back on. I didn't change the hard drive, though. What I did is, and in retrospect I should have shown this on camera, but what I did is I let it boot up. When those data errors came up, I pushed ignore. It then told me that there was not enough memory to load the registry, which is a bogus error message. The reason why it says that is because it can't actually load it, so it has no idea what size it is, and the automatic assumption that it makes is that it's too big to fit in the registry. So I did that. When the prompt came up to restore from a backup, I did that, restarted the machine, and then it came back up again. And I went to reinstall all the drivers, so I let it do that, and that is where we stand right now. Hooray! We have a desktop now! And you can see what a mess it is and all the data that's on it. Well, once the system's done loading, of course. Which actually is taking quite a while because it's got a lot of stuff to load. Confounding the matter is that I don't actually have a Windows key on this keyboard, so I've got to figure out some creative way of opening up the start menu without using the mouse, because I don't have a mouse hooked up either. I was going to have a grand ending to this, but somebody actually walked into the room while I was trying to record this, so I had to quickly shut the camera off. But anyway, that is pretty much it for the video. Thank you for watching. If you have any comments, feel free to leave them down below. And this is CP666 signing off, and I'll see you next time. Till then, got quite a few more of these kinds of videos coming up, so let me know what you think of this style.